everybody, welcome to another month of Vine Path. Vine Path is a wine club put on through Baco's Wine and Cheese, located in Boston's Back Bay. And every month I pick a few wines relating to a topic in the world of wine, and we explore it through the lens of those wines. This month the theme is wines that come from volcanic soils. You may have heard of volcanic wines. I feel like it's a trendy thing that wine journalists are featuring lately. It's a broad umbrella because it could mean so many different kinds of wines from all over the world. All it means it's grapes that are grown through vines that are grown in soils that are influenced by volcanic activity. That may be millions of years ago and the deposits that have remained and influenced the soil type, or it may be land that literally is next to an active volcano. So this all sounds really cool, but is there actually anything to it? So like I said, not all volcanic wines are created the same. There's just so many factors that influence the wine. But overall, wines from volcanic soils tend to be a little more savory. There's a certain minerality to them, but a few things that they have in common. Volcanic soils are usually really high in iron, and that's what attributes to the saltiness of a wine. Just like in food, when there's a little salt added where there's fruit and other things going on, it just highlights those notes. So it's almost like adding salt to your ice cream. It will make whatever flavor that ice cream is really pop, and it does the same in wine. Another thing is that volcanic soils usually don't retain too much water. This makes the vine have to struggle and be put under a little pressure. A little pressure on a vine goes a long way. It usually makes the berries more concentrated in flavor and with more interesting fruity notes. Remember, at the end of the day, a vine's mission is to have really sweet and delicious fruit so that prey like birds will come to eat it and spread the seeds to continue the family line. It's evolution at its finest. Volcanic soils tend to not be as fertile, so the yields of the vines are usually lower. And again, this adds to the concentration and deepness of the grapes. But enough chit chat, let's try the wines. Up first is Meinklang's Foam Vulkan from Somló. Meinklang is an amazing winery, primarily based in Austria. They're a biodynamic operation that is all about making low intervention wines. They are one of the wineries that really put natural wine on the map. But they're all about holistic practices. They care a lot about the cattle on their land and using animals as natural fertilizers, but they have an operation in Hungary. Actually, culturally, the area that they're in Austria and the area that they're in Hungary have a lot of overlap. Hungary is really coming up in the mainstream wine scene because they have such interesting, expressive wines that we've really just started tapping into. And by we, I'm talking about the US market. So the area Somló is actually quite a small winemaking region. It was formed 5 million years ago as a result of a volcano eruption. Sure enough, the vineyards have a bunch of ash deposits and basalt. So a lot of the winemakers that are in this part really think that there's a unique minerality in the wines. The two main white grapes here are two indigenous grapes that I had never heard of, Harslevelu and Jafark. Jafark specifically, that name means sheep's tail because of the shape of the grape clusters, is said to be this region's flagship grape. It almost went extinct because it's really difficult to grow. It's prone to rotting, but if you know how to work it, it gives beautiful results, and for that reason a lot of winemakers wanted to bring it back, and it's having a renaissance. The nose here smells like orange marmalade and oyster shell, a hint of smoke, a little ginger. The palate is like canned pineapples, a little briny. This is wonderful. This really wakes you up. And I hadn't mentioned it before, but this is a pet nat. They do bottle it before it's done fermenting. It keeps fermenting in the bottle, and the result is a bubbly wine. Bubbles much smaller than other methods of sparkling wine. The bubbles are persistent. I opened this bottle yesterday and the bubbles are still very present. There's a spice in this wine, but there's also something very delicate. So I would actually love to have this with some sushi. I think it would really highlight the delicate flavors of the fish, but still be enough to pair with a little wasabi or ginger. Up next, it's Casa Setaro's Munazei, the Lacryma Christi del Vesuvio. It's the 2021. The winemaker here, Massimo Setaro, and his family are located in Trecas, which is in the Naples region in Campania, Italy, specifically in the Vesuvius National Park, which since 1995 has been a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Vesuvius is actually the only active volcano in continental Europe. This area is so historic. The wines of this area before the eruption of Vesuvius in the 1st century AD were actually really sought after. Even Pliny the Elder wrote about him, and he was quoted saying that the best time to drink The wines of Vesuvius are about 10 years after the vintage, but they are still making wine. Lacryma Christi is a blend that wineries make. Lacryma Christi meaning the tears of Christ falling onto Vesuvius. Very dramatic. And most Lacryma Christi's Biancos have a blend of grapes, especially a grape called Falangina. This one is 100% Carpetone, which is very unique and indigenous to this area. I had never heard of it, I'd never had it, and this was a great introduction. Massimo comes from a family that has grown grapes for generations. It wasn't until 2005 that he decided to bottle his own wine. The artwork is beautiful on these. We actually have bottles of their red and bottles of their olive oil, and they all have this eye, but it's actually the edge of two mountains and the top of the volcano as the eye, so it has a deeper meaning. This wine is so floral, almost like a baking spice to it. It reminds me of amaretto cookies, something that's both toasty, herbal, baked, and the palate really comes together with a lot of fruit, light nuttiness, a bitterness that almost reminds me of like almond skin. It's usually referred to phenolic bitterness, the influence of either maybe a little skin or a little seed. It doesn't say, but I'm sure there's maybe a light skin contact in this wine. More than anything, it has 6 months on the lees, but it's all done in stainless steel. Really high acid. These almost remind me, the fruit and minerality of this wine remind me of Necco wafers. I think is really cool. Very tart. The texture is beautiful. It's almost weighty. It almost reminds me of the thickness of when you're making jello before the jello sets. I would have this with something very simple. There's a lot going on in this wine. I would have this with some fish that has some weight to it, so maybe like bass. Very simple preparation, maybe just lemon, good olive oil, herbs, a side of very lemony roasted potatoes. I think something simple and comfort food like that would make a really nice pairing. Up next, it's a los Viñateros Bravos, which is a winery from Chile. This is the 2021 Volcánico Pais from the Itata Valley. And so we're in Chile, where honestly all along the Pacific coast, from South America all the way up to Canada, there's volcanic influence in the soil. Chile has so much history in wine. You'll see on the label here, it says 1551. That's when the Spaniards brought over grapes to Chile, and in fact they brought this grape, Pais. Pais is also known as Listan Negro from the Canary Islands, another volcanic area, but it's also known as the Mission grape, and it was planted all over the Americas, even in California, and it was brought over for sacramental purposes. Sometimes it's looked down as a simple, boring grape, but in places like this, it really shines. So Leonardo Eraso is the winemaker and owner of this winery, and he has a bunch of expressive, very unapologetic Chilean wines. I think this wine showcases the nerviness that wines from volcanic soils tend to have. It's this like tension, again, underlying savoriness that make you want to have more and more. On the nose, you get a lot of watermelon and black cherry, a mix of lighter, fresher fruit and deeper, darker. And not shocking, I'm getting a lot of minerality, a little rose petally and stony, even some hibiscus. And the palate is a lot of ripe fruit. I would say this is a mix of red and black fruit. Usually in wine, you kind of go one way or the other, or sometimes it could be blue fruit. This is a mix. A lot of graphite on the finish. Imagine licking a pencil. That's typical of wines of this area. Overall, this is a really, I would say, dreamy wine. It like sneaks up on you at first. It's simple, but I think the dynamics of it are working really well. It almost reminds me of an interesting Beaujolais from one of the crus of Beaujolais, but it's its own thing. The fruit is very ripe, and though it feels fresh, there's definitely a lot of structure here. This is perfect for a summer heavier dish, like maybe some braised lamb with a side of greens and some sort of strawberry rhubarb reduction or something kind of summery. And I can't talk about this winery or region without mentioning the unfortunate fires that occurred earlier this year in 2023. It really devastated the area. Leo and his winery lost 90% of their crop, and best case scenario, when they replant, it'll be at least 2 years that they are able to have a vintage. And unfortunately, he's not the only winemaker that is experiencing this. These are fires due to climate change, which is a sad truth that's happening all over the world. I know I'm going to keep up with this winery and definitely support as much as I can, because there's so much history in this part. We cannot lose it. Actually, something I forgot to mention, the vines in this wine are at least 150 years old. Chile is an area that was never affected by phylloxera. It is suspected that some of the vines that these grapes are from are up to 300 years. So we have to do everything we can to preserve wineries like this. Up next is the 2021 Aola Amity Hills Pinot Noir from Brooks Winery. So we're back again to the Willamette Valley. Again, as I'd mentioned, the West Coast in the Americas has a lot of volcanic soil. A lot of these wine regions are very close to tectonic plates. For example, Napa also has some volcanic soil in California. Brooks is a winery that I've come to respect and really like over the years. I didn't know too much about their history. It was started in the 90s by Jimmy Brooks, who really tragically, unfortunately, passed away in 2004. Instead of the winery being bought by somebody else or anything of that, the family continued it. Jimmy's sister Janie took over, and eventually with the help of Jimmy's son Pascal, who was just a little boy when Jimmy died, and winemaker Chris Williams, who was also a friend of Jimmy's, they've continuously made stunning wines in the vision that Jimmy would have had. It's a really cool company. They're actually biodynamic, Demeter certified. They're a B Corporation, which I'm starting to learn more about in general, but I'm seeing it a lot more in wine, which I think is great, because not only does it mean that they have respect and actually take measures when it comes to their agriculture practices, but also there's transparency in their supply chain practices and human resources, taking care of the land and their people. So the Aola Amity Hills is filled with volcanic soil. This wine in particular is from 9 different vineyards, 6 of which have volcanic soil. And I can't get enough of this Pinot Noir. It's so spicy and red fruit driven. It's textbook Pinot Noir. I actually had this last week open as the mystery bottle at Bacco's, and 2 people got it right. 2 people were able to pick out that this was Pinot Noir from Oregon, which just goes to show that there is varietal correctness in this wine. This wine has been aged for 10 months in neutral French oak. It almost reminds me of a sangria in a bottle. It has like this little cinnamon spice. It has a little orange fruit. On the palate, there's much more black cherry and pomegranate. I saw on their website they shout out cherry pie and jello, which I see here. I would have this with some pulled pork. I think meatiness and light sweetness in pulled pork would go really nice with the fruit and acidity in this wine. Something I will say about all the wines that we had today is they've got depth and grit. I tried these wines over the course of the week. They've really kept up and still taste phenomenal the day after, some a few days after. I think there's something to be said about volcanic soil. I think it gives sturdy vines with fruit that gives a lot of personality, and in turn the wines under the guidance of good winemaking make very expressive, sturdy wines. I intentionally wanted to do regions that you didn't necessarily think of when you think of volcanic soil. A lot of people go straight to Santorini, Sicily, but I thought it was fun to explore lesser known regions in the world of volcanic soil. There's even a yearly conference for wineries that make wine grown on volcanic soil. It's called the Volcanic Wine Conference. 3rd year was held last June in New York City. It's put on by John Sasbo, who's a Canadian sommelier who actually wrote a book called Volcanic Wines, Salt, Grit, and Power, in which he explores all things volcanic wines. So I think that this is more than just a trend. If anything, it's a lens from which to experience and look at the world of wine. I hope you all enjoyed. Cheers. See you next month.